So can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Alexis. You can know me by Lexicat. I'm Lexicat on Twitter, and I believe I am Lexicat34 on Twitch. I am from Canada. I'm 26, and you can find me those places or on the Blackout Club Discord.
Perfect. All right. So how long have you been involved in ARGs?
So there's a couple of different kinds of ARGs that have run. A lot of the stuff nowadays is very video game based. It's promoting something, which is less of a bad thing and more of a this is how they get money to run these super cool things. So with a focus on these super high-end, high-scale ones, I would say about maybe 2 years, and with more of a focus on community run ones or puzzle questy ones or things like that, I would say about 10.
Do you feel like your time working with ARGs helps you with the story and mysteries of the Blackout Club?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anything that forces you to kind of learn how to do cryptography, to learn how to spot patterns in art and clues and things like that, to sort of think with critical judgment is going to help you try and solve any kind of thing for any kind of video game. I find myself doing escape rooms all the time because when I was younger, I enjoyed ARGs so much, because the challenge of spotting things connected together and puzzling through something is something I very much enjoy.
All right. How did you get started with ARGs?
So initially I was part of a community that would play online reality games. They used to call them ORGs. I was a big fan of a show called The Mole. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No, can't say I have.
Okay. It was this. It was initially a Dutch show. Well, no, sorry. It was Belgian, then it was Dutch. The bigger version was Dutch, but then it brought over to America around mid-2000s. It's essentially a show where they brought a bunch of contestants together, but one of them was hired to sabotage it. And they would run a bunch of challenges that would either earn or lose them money based on how they performed. There was no voting off, none of that social deception-y stuff. It was just one person was trying to make them fail and win as least money amount possible. And then they would take a quiz at the end of an episode and try and determine who it was, and whoever knew least would go home. And that kind of concept to me was yo, I could watch people solve people and also solve because the challenges weren't just hold something up as long as you can. They were often very mental, very puzzly challenges, and there's a lot of twists and turns in that sense. And so that really got me into the sort of concept that the games could be very deep and very multi-layered, and I fell in love with that right then. And then from that point onward, I wanted to play that game myself, but of course, one, being in Canada, you're not going to be able to have that access to that, and two, being that young. But also, it's just the thing where it's how are you going to get to do that? So what I ended up doing was I ended up playing those kind of games online, and the puzzles people would come up with, the little tricks people would use to encode stuff in their websites, a code that you had to go through and find. It was all a race to the top of how much someone would actually do to hide a piece of information so that you could use for the game. And really from there, I realized that it wasn't always just so much the reality game I enjoyed. It was the puzzle solving and even the human aspect that I really enjoyed.
All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. So how did you get started with the Blackout Club?
It was in early alpha, or before that, when I saw a ad for the Blackout Club. The other half of me, I'm a huge horror nerd. I love all kinds of horror movies. My favorite kinds of escape rooms, like I said earlier, are horror escape rooms. I'm a huge, huge horror buff. And so whenever I see a horror game where it's oh yeah, it's 4-player co-op horror, and it has a very spooky theme, got some very Stephen King vibes going on, it got put through my pipeline for obvious reasons. I watched the trailer and I said to my husband at that time, yo, this is a game I need to mark. I need to play this game. And so when it first came out in beta, we were let's wait a little bit to see some reviews. We saw some really positive reviews and said it was only going to go up from there. We're all right, let's buy it. And so we bought it and played it as a 4-player group for a while before any of the voice stuff really happened. So we were just playing it as like a stealth 'em up style, like fun thing, and we really had fun with it. And then we got a little bit bored of it because we played so much, and then so we kind of put it down. And then it's like, I want to play again, and I came back, and then basically what happened was I have a streamer friend who streams every Friday, or every second Friday. Sometimes we skip one. It's called Viking Blonde. He's like, hey, do you want to play on my stream as a guest? And I'm like, absolutely. And so we've been playing every week, and some of those voice interactions have happened through then. And that's how I really got into it. That's how I got into the lore, how I got into the community with the Discord. So basically, by sort of coming back in through another part of the community, someone else who was like into playing it being like, hey, do you want to come like enjoy it with me? I was like, yes, please. And I came back into it.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so I'm going to take a quick detour before the last question and ask you, hold on. So you mentioned pattern recognition as something that helps you with your ARGs and presumably with TBC too. Can you describe your process when you come across a clue, how you begin to unpack it?
Absolutely. So, just like with humans, again, I'm a psychologist, so this is something I've been like looking into for people a long time. People tend to work on patterns and habits and stuff like that. So just like with people, one, these games are made by people, but two, codes and stuff and puzzles tend to have obvious patterns they'll follow. Things that have been done in the past, people try and stray a little bit from, but there's only so many kinds of puzzles you can do. So when you notice a clue like, oh hey, they're giving us cryptograms, and oh hey, they're giving us a bunch of like dance poses, and oh hey, the big payoff was those dance poses killed a god. It's like that all clicks together in my mind as like, okay, yeah, I see where this is pointing, and it's pointing at these are spelling something out. And so I dove deep into that, and like I remember the first night I had a Discord conversation about that, I was like, what about this, and this, and things I was noticing. People were like, oh, I think you're right. And it turned out I was right. About the old language and things like that. And the more I dug into the old language, the more I like, because the thing is, I hadn't gotten any real confirmation from any gods when I started like posing things at gods. I kept saying my theories to them and saying more theories to them, and they kept being like, yeah, you're mostly there, yeah, you're mostly right. And so I kept learning new pieces of information that people hadn't found yet. Because when a god shows up and they want to tell you something, it's not like they're not going to tell you like something you've already told them, right? Like they're not going to just repeat information you know, unless they know nothing else, which is like where I've now hit my wall. Most gods at this point, we know the exact amount of information, I think, unless I find some new breakthrough at which I can push them at, and that at that point they might give me something new. So I'm just currently, my old tongue stuff is like a little bit stuck on what exactly the cadence of the movement, sound, position, and group number makes something, because it's almost like, again, I talked about this being like interpretive dance, and how that's like a language of its own in a way, like it's almost a universal language. You could, in theory, communicate most anything through that. I just have to figure out what exactly that means and what exactly the best way to sort of solve that is. And without a whole lot of like encoded information for it, we're a little bit stuck, or at least I'm a little bit stuck. Some people might be able to like poke the gods a bit more and figure something out about that, but that's sort of my patterning plan. And that's kind of what comes back to patterning, right? Like you notice a small detail and then you extrapolate, and you just kind of like be like, okay, is this proven to be false? If not, can I prove it to be false? If not, can I prove it to be true? And if you can do none of those, then you have a solid theory that you should be consistently trying to prove either true or false, null or not, right? Like null hypothesis style thing. And when you come across like something that you think might be encoded, like for example, some people have been like looking at the recording of the Chancellors with TMC's new mission, right? Something like that, I've taken a listen to it, and it's very hard to tell whether something like that is just them kind of giving you like, yes, here's the vocalization and musical intonations that fit with an old language thing, and now this is TMC trying to sort of, cancel out some kind of instructional thing to the song is done. or whether there's some other deeper message that TMC is implanting in them. And that's a healthy bit of speculation. And anyone who like recorded that and looked at that and says, is there language there? Is there something there? Should be absolutely commended, because that's exactly the kind of pattern matching and thinking you want to say. Is this possible? Yeah, absolutely. And so you should be looking into that. And even if you find nothing, even if you're way off base and you find nothing, you've added to the story in two ways. Firstly, you've provided a theory that maybe end up being disproven, but also drives more people into looking into it. And if someone disproves your theory, don't be sad. That means they did enough research into it to disprove it and get further along. And two, you've also just provided a lot of like intrigue. Like, what if TMC is trying to brainwash parents and claim some subsection of SAO's people for himself? What if TMC is just trying to cancel out the song and see what happens? What if he's just being a scientist, right? Like there's plenty of different ways you can go about it. And so that kind of intrigue and lore towards that only drives people towards asking those questions to TMC. And when those questions get asked, the gods come and answer, and you get more information. So, and that's kind of just the way that like collaborative ARG stuff works, right? When you try and solve something on your own, you only have your own biases to sort of look at. When you try and solve something with a group, you can present a theory and then people can say, well, I don't know about that. And as long as people are, you know, trying to kind of in good faith figure it out and disprove in the sense of like, I want to see where this goes, as opposed to like just shut you down, then you're only going to get good places. And that's exactly the kind of like pattern matching thing you want to have. You want people to find problems and propose solutions, and if the solutions don't match the problem, then you discard them. And so like it can be something as obvious as, we have 3 picture clues and we need to find a password to unlock this particular thing. For example, there was a recent ARG, a second run of ARG for Tender that was done for the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines thing, on bloodfortrade.com, 5 passworded things that led to a bunch of recorded messages, and every one of them would have 3 sort of picture clues. Well, they're more like online link clues, and they were like tangentially related. What they would do is they would like, you would look at them and say, how do these connect to do something? For example, one of them was a Belgian movie called something IV, so 4, a article on the art of sculpture, and a link to like something about like Clementis or whatever, like the Pope. And so we were looking through those things. They're like, how do we connect these? Well, Clement the Fourth is a pope, and we looked at that for the longest time. And eventually, I won't say the answer here, but it became something much more obvious than any of us actually thought. We spent literally 24 hours trying to solve that puzzle, which isn't age in ARG time sometimes. And so it was a very simple puzzle that we just overlooked. And someone came in and finally said, wait, is it this guy's? And then they tried it. It's like, oh, it's this. And we're like, oh, wow, we're way overthinking. And that's kind of what happens, right? Like, you just have to kind of put things together and do your best to like work on your own and with a group. Because what we did as a group was like, all right, has anyone tried this? Because like I was on my phone at the time, I couldn't enter the answers. I couldn't like, do a whole lot of Googling. I was just like, all right, guys, what about this concept? What about, all right, well, Clement could be Clemens, right? We could think about Samuel Clemens. We could think about Mark Twain. What about Mark Twain? What about the 4th book Mark Twain wrote, or some kind of statue? And someone was like, what about Clement IV's tomb, right? None of these were correct, for the record, but like, it's kind of how you pattern match and how you think, right? It's like you take a small clue, you extrapolate, you find something that fits, and you go, okay, how does this work? And in the end, maybe you're right, maybe you're not, but you work together and you find that kind of solution.
Right. One thing leads to another.
Exactly.
All right. So what advice do you have for new players?
Well, the biggest thing I can say for new players is, in a community like this, to find a group of people that you want to play this game with and play it with them. And like, it's okay to go find other people to play with. In fact, I encourage it at some point. But to begin, to really start out, have a group of 3 or 4 people that you just play the game with, maybe once a week, and really experience the story as you go through. And you'll hear this advice on on Will Viking Blonde stream about every Friday. He says anyone new who comes in, buy this game, find 3 of your friends, treat it like a board game, play it through. Because the best thing you can do is experience this story without anyone else kind of like contaminating it for you. And not that anyone would do it negatively, just sort of they have preconceptions, and you really want to go in blind for that like first experience. Because really, I'll be honest with you, the reason why I love this game so much is because I had that first experience with my husband and that group I played with, where we just played as a horror game, and then I came back to it as an ARG, and like I have that like that dual sort of sense of it. So I would really consider that. But then once you do that, once you're into the lore, once you have all that kind of thing caught up, the next piece of advice I have for new players is just insert yourself. Find places that you can like try and solve puzzles in, find places that you can make story with, find like people, play with new people, just insert yourself into the community, because the best thing you can do is to sort of avoid that kind of, how do I put this? The community can sometimes be a little bit tight-knit and a little bit withdrawn from people, just because they've been playing with each other and it's like a story game, and so they have the story with their own people and they don't tend to spread out as much. Well, there's plenty of people who do want to kind of introduce that story to new players. There's lots of people who will look for that. And so if you look for the people who want to include you, who want to sort of open up and sort of guide you towards a story, that's kind of what I would say for new players. Insert yourself into the story, find puzzles to solve, even if it's something that's just like a personal passion project for you. For example, when I came in, the old language was like a minor thing, and I made it a personal passion project to try and solve the old language. And that's kind of how been my shtick, along with a couple other like story beat shticks. And that's another important thing too. Like, if you're not into the role play aspect, if you're just there to like play the game and solve the puzzle and kind of play as like yourself, that's totally fine. And no one should definitely tell you otherwise. But making a character for this kind of game and sort of like being like, this is my character for when the gods come up, this is my character for this, and this is how I view it, and this is what my character does, kind of gives you an access to like telling your own story in a way too, and that kind of gives you something cool as well. So that's what my advice for new players. Insert yourself into the community by puzzle and by story and by interaction and stuff like that. Make new friends and look for people who want to sort of help you. And like on the other side, for people like us who've been playing a long time, my biggest advice is when you see a new player, when you see someone who is like looking to join the game or has been only there recently, like envelop them in the mystique and the horror and the depth of the game. Like if they got a meeting with someone and they saw a god and the god was nice, and be like, now the gods did this too. Now, like, you know, they're very scary. Or like if they're scared, they gotta be like, hey, some of them were nice. Like you like show them that duality, get them really into the like a good Agatha Christie novel, hook them on both ends, right? Give them that little bit of like the other side they're not seeing. Show them the puzzles. If they're really into puzzles, show them the really complicated stuff, like with the cryptography. If they're really into like the story, show them all the story beats, all the really cool videos that I've recorded. Like if they want to play with other people, invite them to play with you. Like talk about like your character with them if you're into that. If like you know, show them that this is a community where people want other people to sort of be a part of it. Because that's always been my biggest thing. My biggest thing with ARGs is because we have such a small community at sometimes, when a new person comes in, it's like, hey, they're writing an ARG for this particular lore piece that I really enjoy. For example, lots of people joined the ARG community when Vampire the Masquerade initially ran Tender as its first ARG thing. I went back into it after a while because of that, and I ended up going to a VIP party in San Francisco, which is one of the coolest things I've ever done, and I would happily talk about, but I don't want to get too off track. But that really like was a huge experience for me, because like someone's like, hey, you should apply to go to that, and like I was in Seattle at the time, I was like, all right, cool, and it was just such a cool thing. And so like for me, when I was like looking back in and being like, all right, cool, let me like go into this Discord here and doing this and that, like really getting back and involved, I was like, okay, let me like do some of this. And I was on both ends of it, right? Like people who were like been there for like a little bit longer than I had, being like, hey, cool, like thanks, good to see you back doing this kind of thing. And then people who are coming in new being like, what do I do? I'm like, hey, how about this and this and this? And I always harp on people who like, there's like a thing where people are like, you know, if someone comes in and asks a question that's already been asked and answered, people will be like, oh, check the pins, like, like, you know, go check that thing. It's just like, no, like, I mean, it's, if someone asks the same question over and over again, that can be like difficult, but why not just show them a little bit of like empathy and just be like, oh, hey, it's this, and you should look into it like that. Like, there's no reason to scare people off, in my opinion. And so that's kind of how I look at the Blackout Club as well. We should be looking to sort of envelop people in all natures of it, in the nature that we should be looking to, like, as much as we can, play with new people. We should be looking to, as much as we can, make new people feel comfortable, like, sharing with us. We should be looking to share information with them and try and solve puzzles with them, make them a part of, not, if not necessarily our story, the story in general. Because once they feel invested, they'll make more of their friends invested. It just kind of cascades out. And the more people that play this game, the bigger it will become. And the bigger the game becomes, the more fun we'll have. It's just a community thing that, like, I learned from, like I said, other ARG and other reality game communities. The more people you have who are interested in doing a thing, the larger the community will become, and the more, like, just because there's more people, like, providing their own perspective and thoughts in general, already it becomes a richer community. But also with a game like this, where it's like people are buying and spending money on the game, it also provides, you know, like, question with more, like, evidence that, like, oh, people are still interested in this game, we should still be interested in this game. Because I can tell you there's plenty of games out there that have had interest and then just had a niche community that is very insular and doesn't have a whole lot of things, and then years later the game dies. And everyone's like, the servers are shutting down, but I love this game. It's like, well, yeah, but the community didn't grow, and they're not going to continue with it, right? And so it's definitely a thing where it's like, if you want your community to live, like follow the model of Riot Games. Because I remember being recruited to play League of Legends back in season 1, and I remember being like, really, do I have to play this? And then playing it, and it wasn't as much fun learning it because it was a bit frustrating to learn. What was fun was there was people there who were laughing along with me and having fun with it and made it fun, and that's what became addictive of it. And so, and now look at League of Legends. That they literally had a player referral system where they wanted people to make people come play with them as opposed to just play the game. And now it's got millions of players. It's huge. Riot is expanding into new games. Like, it's enormous. And so that kind of same model is functional on a small scale as it is on a large scale. If you bring people into the game, if you bring people that you care about, or you just find people in general who are new and coming in, and it's like, hey, you should play this game. It's a lot of fun. I'll play with you. And I'll say this on Viking Blonde stream all the time. Someone's like, hey, I want to pick up this game. It looks really fun. What should I do? It's like, well, one, again, will go into his thing about find 4 people play like that. And then it's like, also too, it's like, hey, I play this game all the time on my own. I'm always happy to join and play with someone else. And so a lot of people from that community have picked up the game, and then I started playing with them, and then I've had a couple God interactions with those people. And by able to share my God interaction and, like, with them and have them be part of it, they kind of get hooked more into that game. And so that's the advice I would give for new people and old people, to sort of, like, work together and find, like, ways to sort of, like, bring new blood into the community and have that new blood learn the culture of, we are a community, we are a group.